Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. As I pulled into the driveway that Thursday night, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. My thoughts were tangled in the remnants of work, the endless project meetings, the long hours that had drained every ounce of energy. Our house was quiet, a peaceful silence that typically welcomed me home, but tonight it felt different. There was a chill in the air, a stillness that was almost eerie. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. Mia, my wife of nearly a decade, was already in bed when I walked through the door. Her side of the bed was slightly rumpled, as if she'd fallen asleep suddenly, but there were no signs of her usual bedtime routine, no half-read novel, no phone on the bedside table. I tried to shake off the unease that crept up my spine and told myself it was just the stress from work playing tricks on me. Yet, as I lay down beside her, the feeling lingered. The warmth I usually felt being beside her had cooled somehow. The changes began subtly over the next few weeks. Mia was distant, more preoccupied than usual. She had recently taken on a new role at her job, one that required more hours and, apparently, more late nights. It wasn't out of the ordinary for her to be dedicated to her work, but it became a pattern that was hard to ignore. She started going to work dinners a couple of times a week, sometimes not getting back until well past midnight. At first, I chalked it up to the added responsibilities, assuming her new role came with a steep learning curve. But every time she left, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Then there was her phone. For years, it had been nothing more than an object lying around our house, a source of random alarms she'd forget to turn off or a device for scrolling through cooking videos and sharing cute photos of the kids. But recently, Mia's relationship with her phone had changed. She kept it on her, clutching it tightly whenever I was nearby, turning the screen away if I happened to glance in its direction. She even brought it with her to the bathroom, a detail so small it would have gone unnoticed if it hadn't suddenly become routine. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, I casually asked how her new role was going. She hesitated for just a moment, then launched into a story about an upcoming conference she needed to attend. She described it as a few days away to meet with clients, a necessary trip to solidify the company's standing. There was something almost rehearsed in her tone, an air of detachment as she went over the details. I tried not to read too much into it, but it was impossible not to notice the shift in her demeanor. As she packed for the conference that Friday, I watched her carefully, noting the ease with which she folded her clothes, the almost too casual way she selected each item. Her suitcase was full of outfits I rarely saw her wear, form-fitting dresses, a few pieces of lingerie that hadn't seen the light of day in ages. Part of me wanted to believe I was imagining things, that the recent stresses of life had made me paranoid. But in my gut, I knew something wasn't right. That weekend, I was alone with the kids, playing the part of the single dad for 3 days. I tried to keep things normal for them, taking them to the park, making their favorite meals, and avoiding the hollow emptiness that seemed to settle in every room. But every time I looked at my phone, hoping for a text from her, I was greeted with silence. I tried calling once or twice, and she answered, cheerful and almost too bright, saying she was busy with meetings or dinners. Her tone was warm, affectionate even, but it felt hollow. On the second night of her absence, I was lying awake, staring at the ceiling, when my mind wandered to darker places. I hated feeling like a paranoid husband, like I was the kind of guy who couldn't trust his wife. Yet the signs were impossible to ignore. So, I did what I had never done before, I checked our shared credit card statements. I told myself it was to see if there were any charges I needed to pay off, that it was a practical concern and nothing more. But the minute I logged in, my heart sank. There were charges from a hotel. They were small enough to go unnoticed, but they were there, incremental charges from the hotel she'd never mentioned by name, and it wasn't the one where her conference was supposedly taking place. I scrolled through the recent activity, seeing other charges I didn't recognize, a restaurant I knew she hadn't mentioned, a small jewelry store purchase that stung more than I cared to admit. It was like uncovering pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed, and each revelation added weight to the suspicions I had tried so hard to ignore. When she returned on Sunday evening, she was all smiles, the picture of a devoted wife coming home after a long work trip. She hugged the kids tightly, laughed at their stories from the weekend, and gave me a warm peck on the cheek. But behind her familiar scent and cheerful banter, I could see something guarded in her eyes, a hint of something hidden. That night, as we lay in bed, I fought the urge to confront her. The questions churned in my mind, but I didn't know how to start. How could I ask her without seeming like I'd invaded her privacy, without admitting that I'd checked her credit card activity? What if I was wrong, and my suspicions were just a product of my own insecurities? I told myself to wait, to gather more information before saying anything. I convinced myself that I was being careful, that I was protecting our marriage by not jumping to conclusions. But deep down, I knew I was stalling, afraid of the truth that was inching closer with every suspicious charge and evasive glance. Over the next few weeks, Mia's pattern continued. Late nights, excuses about work, and a growing tension that I could almost taste in the air. I became obsessed with noticing every detail, cataloging each strange moment. Then, one night, she left her car unlocked, something she never did. Out of habit, I glanced inside, and that's when I saw it, a small, unfamiliar packet of protection under the seat. It was such a stark contrast to her usual tidy, orderly habits, and it all but confirmed my worst fears. In that moment, a part of me broke. I couldn't get that image out of my mind, the small packet sitting there, as damning as a neon sign in the dark. Seeing it felt like a slap, an undeniable blow, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I wanted to believe it was something innocent, maybe left by a friend or forgotten from a time long past. But I knew my wife. Mia was meticulous, always careful about details, especially in her car. This wasn't an oversight. It was a revelation. I tried to go about my week normally. I took the kids to school, showed up at work, and smiled when people asked about my family. But the weight of that discovery lingered, growing heavier each day. I spent hours turning the situation over in my mind, debating with myself about what to do next. I considered confronting her outright, asking for an explanation and praying there was some innocent reason for it. But a deeper part of me knew that I needed more than words. I needed proof. That's when I made the decision to gather evidence. I felt dirty even thinking about it, like I was betraying her by being suspicious. But this wasn't just about a suspicion anymore, it was about knowing the truth, finally letting myself see what had been in front of me for weeks. The first step was checking the bank statements, and I did so meticulously, looking back over the last few months. Each line felt like a breadcrumb, leading me further down a path I was almost afraid to follow. There were dinners I hadn't known about, at places she'd never mentioned visiting. There were hotel charges on weekends I thought she was on work trips, payments to places that held no connection to her job. I started noticing a pattern, almost like a routine, certain weekends, certain restaurants, certain times of day. It felt surreal, piecing together the reality of what had been happening while I was home, thinking everything was normal. It wasn't enough, though. I needed more. After days of deliberation, I reached out to a private investigator. The decision weighed on me, making me feel like I was crossing a line, but I was desperate for clarity. I met with the investigator, a man named Rick, in a nondescript coffee shop a few towns over. He was older, with a grizzled look that spoke of years of experience in his field. He listened as I explained my situation, nodding patiently as I laid it all out, my voice shaky but determined. Rick took notes and asked a few questions, mostly about Mia's routine and the frequency of her work trips. Then he leaned back, his eyes assessing me in a way that made me feel vulnerable, like he could see the pain I was trying so hard to keep hidden. "It's tough," he said, his voice rough but kind. "This kind of thing, no one ever wants to believe it. But sometimes, you have to face it. I'll get you what you need, one way or another." His words felt like both a promise and a warning. Over the next few days, Rick sent me updates. Mia was, as I feared, going places that had nothing to do with her job. The investigator tracked her to another hotel, confirming that she was meeting someone. He even provided me with photos, although I hesitated to look at them, afraid of what I'd see. But the truth was clear, and there was no escaping it anymore. The final piece of the puzzle came on a Saturday. Mia told me she was heading out for a work dinner, and that she'd likely be home late. By now, I'd learned to mask my reactions, keeping my face impassive as I nodded, pretending to believe her story. As she left, I watched her go, a strange calm settling over me. I already knew where she was going, who she was meeting. The evidence Rick had collected was tucked away, a series of photos and hotel receipts I could hardly bring myself to look at. I waited until she was gone, and then, on a whim, I decided to go to the hotel myself. I parked a few blocks away, my heart hammering as I walked toward the entrance. Part of me hoped I wouldn't find her there, that it was all some horrible misunderstanding. But I knew better. Rick had been thorough, leaving no doubt about her plans. The lobby was quiet, a faint scent of hotel perfume lingering in the air as I walked through. I tried to appear casual, as if I were just another guest passing through. Then I saw them. Mia, standing by the bar with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, sharply dressed, with an air of confidence that grated on my nerves. They were close, their heads bent together as they spoke, her hand resting on his arm in a way that felt far too familiar. I froze, watching them from a distance, anger and heartbreak warring inside me. She looked happy, more relaxed than I'd seen her in months, and it made me sick. I wanted to march over, confront her, demand answers, but my body wouldn't move. Instead, I turned and left, my steps heavy as I walked back to the car. The pain in my chest felt like it was tearing me apart, but I forced myself to keep going, telling myself that it was almost over. When Mia returned home that night, she was all smiles, kissing me on the cheek and thanking me for understanding her late nights. I played my part, pretending everything was fine, my face an unreadable mask. She went on about her evening, her laughter filling the room as if nothing was wrong. I felt numb, barely able to respond, but she didn't seem to notice. Maybe she was too wrapped up in her own lies, or maybe she just didn't care enough to see the pain in my eyes. After she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the photos Rick had sent me. They were cold, hard evidence of what I'd known deep down but had tried so hard to deny. The betrayal was real, no longer something I could explain away or ignore. I'd spent weeks searching for the truth, and now that I had it, I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, to wake her up and force her to explain herself. But a strange calm had settled over me, a clarity that made me realize I needed to handle this carefully. I couldn't let her manipulate the situation, couldn't allow her to twist the blame back onto me. I'd seen her capacity for deception, her willingness to hide the truth, and I knew I couldn't trust anything she might say. In that quiet, painful moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let her destroy me, wouldn't let her lie her way out of this. I would gather every piece of evidence, every scrap of truth, and I would confront her on my terms. She wouldn't see it coming, wouldn't be able to prepare. When the moment came, I wanted her to feel the shock and betrayal that had consumed me, to understand the depth of the pain she had caused. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions, pretending everything was normal while secretly preparing for the moment I would confront her. I made appointments with a lawyer, started sorting through our finances, and quietly documented everything. I had never imagined myself in this position, but I knew that if I wanted to come out of this with my dignity intact, I had to be smart. One evening, as I sat alone in our bedroom, my resolve hardened. I looked around at the life we'd built together, the memories we'd shared, and felt a bittersweet sense of loss. But it was mixed with a fierce determination, a resolve to reclaim my life from the lies and betrayal that had stolen it from me. I would get through this, I told myself. And when it was over, she would be the one left to face the wreckage she had created. The days leading up to my confrontation with Mia felt like moving through thick, murky water. Every moment was tense, every word between us laced with a quiet but seething resentment that she hadn't noticed yet. I was meticulous in keeping up appearances, never letting on that I knew the truth, that I had seen her with him. I watched her carry on as though our life was untouched by betrayal, and each time she smiled at me, I felt a renewed determination to see this through. One night, as I sat in the living room after she had gone to bed, I thumbed through the evidence I'd collected. The photos, the hotel receipts, and her texts, everything was carefully filed away, ready for when the time was right. I wanted her to know that this was not a hasty reaction or a moment of weakness. It was calculated, controlled, and it would hit her harder because she would never see it coming. I would not be reduced to a begging, broken husband. I wanted her to understand exactly how much she had destroyed with her actions. That Friday, I took a final step in my preparations. I contacted our lawyer and finalized my decision to file for divorce. The paperwork was ready to go, signed and sealed, waiting only for her acknowledgement. I had rehearsed the scene in my mind 100 times, trying to anticipate her reaction. Would she cry, try to justify herself, or would she go on the defensive, shifting blame and telling me it was somehow my fault? When she left for another business dinner that evening, I watched her walk out the door, my heart feeling heavy and hollow. But there was also a strange sense of relief. It would be the last time I sat at home, wondering where she was, wondering if she would come back to me the same person. This time, I knew she was stepping into a trap of her own making, and when she returned, it would all be over. Hours passed as I sat in the quiet house, going over everything once more. I wanted to be calm, collected, and rational when I confronted her. The last thing I needed was to lose my composure and let her twist the situation into an emotional spectacle. I steeled myself, going over the sequence of events, the evidence, and the words I would say. Finally, as the clock neared midnight, I heard her key in the lock. My heart pounded, but I steadied my breathing, reminding myself to stay calm. She walked in, her face lighting up when she saw me, a fake smile plastered on her face. "You're still up?" she asked, setting her purse down by the door. "Did you wait up for me?" "Yeah, I thought we should talk," I said, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the storm brewing inside me. She gave a slight frown, feigning concern. "Is everything okay?" I motioned for her to sit down, and she looked at me quizzically but complied, taking a seat across from me. I could feel her studying me, perhaps sensing that something was different, that my demeanor wasn't the usual, familiar one. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment I would finally reveal what I knew. "Mia," I began, keeping my tone calm, "I know you haven't been completely honest with me." Her face remained impassive, but I saw the slight twitch in her eye, a telltale sign of nervousness. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with caution. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied, pulling the folder of evidence from beside me. "I know about your affair." Her face went pale, and for a brief second, a flash of panic crossed her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out, and I could see her mind racing, struggling to find an explanation, a way to twist the truth. She glanced at the folder in my hands, and it seemed to register that her secret was well and truly out. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. I opened the folder, spreading the contents across the coffee table in front of her. Photos of her at the hotel, receipts, the text messages I'd managed to recover, all laid out in plain sight. There was no denying it now, the truth was there, raw and undeniable. "Are you still going to lie to me?" I asked quietly, feeling a surge of anger rise in my chest. "Or do you think I can't see what's right in front of me?" She sat there in stunned silence, staring at the evidence, her hands shaking slightly as she processed the reality of what she had done and the fact that I knew it all. Slowly, she looked up at me, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. Please, let me explain, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, keeping my gaze steady. Go ahead. Explain to me how lying to my face for months was somehow justified. Tell me how sneaking around behind my back, meeting him in hotel rooms, and coming home to pretend everything was fine makes sense to you. Mia looked down, her fingers nervously picking at her clothes. I was lonely, she began, her voice trembling. You were always so busy, so focused on work. I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel wanted. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, but I forced it down, keeping my voice controlled. So, that's your justification. You were lonely. And you think that makes it okay to betray me? She looked up at me, her expression pleading. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. Do you really think I believe that? I asked, my voice hardening. Do you think I can just accept that you didn't mean to hurt me when you went out of your way to lie, to cover up every trace of what you were doing? This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment mistake, Mia. This was planned, deliberate. You knew exactly what you were doing. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Please, I love you. It was just one time. Don't lie to me, I snapped, feeling my control slipping. It wasn't just once. I have records, Mia. Hotel stays, restaurant bills. This wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. You chose him, over and over, and you knew what it would do to me. Her sobs grew louder, her hands covering her face as she broke down in front of me. But her tears didn't move me, they felt hollow, a pitiful attempt to garner sympathy. I had seen her in those photos, laughing with him, her face alight with a joy I hadn't seen in years. That image burned in my mind, hardening my resolve. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I've filed for divorce. The papers are ready. She looked up, her face a mask of shock and desperation. No, please, no. Don't do this. We can fix this, I can change. I'll do anything, please don't leave me. The irony of her begging for me to stay when she had spent months tearing our life apart was almost laughable. I stood up, feeling the weight of all those lies lift as I looked down at her one last time. This is your choice, Mia. You destroyed what we had, and there's no coming back from that. I won't live like this. She reached out, her hands grasping at the empty air between us. Please, please don't go. I'll do anything. I'll end it with him. I'll prove to you that I'm committed to us. Just, please. But her words felt empty, a desperate attempt to hold on to a life she had already destroyed. I looked at her, my heart numb, the love I once felt buried under the weight of her betrayal. It's too late, Mia. You've made your choice. I turned and walked away, her sobs echoing through the house as I closed the door behind me. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that I had finally broken free from the lies, from the betrayal. I had faced the truth, no matter how painful, and I was done carrying the weight of her choices. The future was uncertain, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I felt the freedom to rebuild my life on my own terms, leaving her and the hollow remnants of our marriage behind. In the weeks following our separation, I felt the familiar patterns of my life start to reform. My days were filled with a surprising sense of calm and clarity, the turmoil of Mia's betrayal slowly loosening its hold on me. I kept myself busy, focusing on work and spending time with the kids. We settled into a new rhythm, one without the constant questions and suspicions that had haunted me during those last few months of our marriage. But there was a peculiar, nagging feeling I couldn't shake. The investigator I'd hired had been thorough, but something about the timing of Mia's affair didn't quite add up. Little details surfaced in my memory, moments where she'd seemed genuinely happy and present with me. Could someone be so utterly convincing, so split between two lives? I thought about the way she had cried, begging me not to leave, swearing that it was a mistake she'd wished to undo. It was hard to know if her regret had been real, or just another act. I told myself to let it go, to move on. But as the divorce proceedings began, I started hearing things around town, murmurs from friends, acquaintances. Someone mentioned seeing Mia out with a friend of hers, a woman I'd barely known named Alicia, who worked in a similar field. They'd been close for a few years, but I hadn't thought much of it. Yet people kept bringing her up, mentioning how inseparable they'd become. It wasn't the kind of thing people usually noticed, but the way they talked about it piqued my interest. It seemed that Alicia had been around during most of the business dinners Mia attended, often the one arranging these outings. Driven by a lingering need to know the truth, I met with Rick, the investigator, again. I laid out my suspicions, as faint and tenuous as they were, and asked him to dig into Alicia's background. After all, if Mia had been lying to me, maybe her friends knew more than they let on. Rick was hesitant, reminding me that his initial investigation had turned up all the proof I needed. But he agreed, and over the next few days, he combed through the records once more. One night, just after I'd put the kids to bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Rick. "You're going to want to see this," it read. My heart raced as I called him back, bracing myself for whatever revelation was coming. "Listen," he began, his tone cautious. "I found something unusual. There's a series of transactions tied to Alicia's credit card, matching the same hotel receipts we had for Mia's stays." I felt my pulse quicken. "What are you saying, Rick? That Alicia was staying with her?" "More than that," Rick replied. "I've reviewed the security footage from the hotels. Alicia was the one meeting Mia each time. There's no man. Alicia was the one there all along." A weight fell over me, pressing down with an intensity one hadn't felt in months. It didn't make sense. How could I have misread everything so badly? "Are you telling me Mia?" I couldn't finish the sentence, my voice cracking under the strain. "Yes. From what I can tell, Alicia and Mia were involved, and this affair, if you want to call it that, was with her. Mia didn't lie about a man because there was no man. The relationship was with Alicia." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut, an entirely different betrayal unfolding before my eyes. I tried to wrap my mind around it, recalling every moment I'd assumed Mia had been with another man. Instead, it was her friend, her closest confidant, this entire time. The knowledge rewrote every painful memory, twisting it into something I could barely comprehend. I hung up with Rick, my head spinning, unsure of what to do or say. The next day, I called Mia, asking her to meet me at a small cafe near our old neighborhood. She agreed, her voice strained but calm, and I could tell she was nervous. When she arrived, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided my eyes. Once we were seated, I leaned in and spoke quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know the truth, Mia. I know about Alicia." Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she might walk out. But she stayed, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and shame. "I wanted to tell you," she whispered, barely able to meet my gaze. "But I didn't know how." "How could you lie like that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "All those times, all those nights I thought you were with someone else. I thought you'd moved on, that you were with another man." Tears welled in her eyes as she spoke, her voice trembling. "I didn't plan it. I didn't want it to happen. Alicia and it just started, and I was so scared to tell you. I thought you'd never understand, and I was terrified of losing everything. So I hid it, and I kept lying, and it spiraled out of control." The truth settled between us, heavy and unyielding. This wasn't a simple betrayal or a moment of weakness, it was something that had fundamentally changed her, and our lives, in a way I hadn't seen coming. I tried to grasp the full weight of what she was saying, but it was too much, too layered with deceit and loss. There was an anger simmering in me that I couldn't ignore. And so you destroyed our marriage, I said, my tone bitter. You hid behind lies and half-truths, letting me believe that it was something else entirely. You could have been honest with me, Mia. I could have handled the truth. But you took away that choice. She nodded, her face tear-streaked and hollow. I know. And I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I didn't want you to find out like this. I didn't want to hurt you. I sat back, trying to make sense of everything she'd said. She'd chosen her secrets over our marriage, over the trust we'd once shared. And now, sitting across from her, I realized that whatever we'd had was gone, stripped away by months of deception. I took a deep breath, finding a calm I didn't know I had. I'm moving forward with the divorce, Mia. I can't undo what's happened, but I can choose what happens next. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I understand. I didn't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll find a way to let this go. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood, leaving her there, a fading figure in my past as I walked out of the cafe. The next few months passed quickly, the final steps of our divorce playing out like a slow-motion train wreck. Mia moved in with Alicia, and I tried to rebuild, finding new strength in my solitude, in the unyielding resolve that came from knowing the truth. And on the day our divorce was finalized, as I left the courthouse, I felt something strange, relief, a sense of peace that had eluded me for too long. I was free, no longer tethered to a lie, no longer bound by secrets I couldn't bear to keep. I was ready to start anew, ready to leave the ghosts of betrayal behind, and to walk into a future that was truly my own.